We're here with Mette Ingvartsen. I'm super excited that we brought her to Manchester for the first time.
Yeah.
And so I think we'll do an interview. I hope it will go in a lot of different directions, but I just want to start very simply that just as a choreographer, I think it's obviously super unique work, and it seems to have to do with these kind of materials. And I think you use the phrase materiality of, a choreography of materiality. I thought maybe you could try to explain a little bit what you mean by that.
Yeah. So I have a really, let's say, conventional dance education. I come from a school in Belgium called Poots, where the focus on the physical, so on the body, is very strong. And I've been working for about 10 years now, and my work has always been extremely physical and body oriented. And with this work, I, for the first time, made a shift towards thinking about what would be a non-human materiality. What would that be? How would it function? How would it move? What would it be able to express? And I started actually this project as a sister project to another piece, which is called Giant City. And both of the pieces deal with questions of immateriality, so also thinking about how in our society today you see more and more processes of immaterial labor, for instance, so that people are working more and more with intellectual work instead of manual work, and that you see, if you look at flows in cities, you see how movement is basically channeled. You put a roadblock and all the cars start to move around, and so I was very interested by these flows and fluxes that you see a lot in cities. And as a counter point to that, I also started thinking about that in nature you have this, let's say, natural movement, but that is a lot about the movement of air. Do you hear me? And let's say the immateriality of air. So like, how is it that this thing that is nothing can have a quality, thickness, expressive capacity, and how this so relates to these processes of immaterialization that we see in society in many, I think, many different levels. And so, yeah, so that's...
No, that's a super rich answer, because also to me, I was always thinking about nature and thinking about natural, obviously water, clouds, air movements coming into view, fire and sparks. And so it's interesting to me to hear you speak about abstraction, immateriality, cities. So like, what's the relation between your work and nature?
Yeah, so the thing was that I actually started on a project which was it was a kind of science fictional projection on how the world could look in, let's say, 50 years or 100 years or even much further out in the future. And if you look at science fictional, so science fiction movies, basically you have like the utopic science fiction movies, and then you have the dystopic. And if you look at the dystopic science fiction movies, very often the status of nature is, going down. So there is a kind of decay, and it connects to all the questions about ecology, about sustainability, about how we deal with the fact that the natural of nature is no longer there. And so in a way, this is also a kind of projection or imagination of what would we do in 50 years if there were no natural spaces left. Would we start inventing these artificial nature spaces, or like we already see that gardens, but even nature resorts and these kind of things are being artificially constructed in order for people to enjoy nature, but that is no longer natural. So that's where let's say the civilized city questions comes together with the more natural representations.
So what you're saying also makes me think about it's kind of a movement in philosophy to think about things in a different way, that maybe that's not such an obvious distinction between a natural thing and a human-made thing. Like, for instance, Bruno Latour's work recently on compositional or a compositionist manifesto. Is that also something that you're interested in?
I think there's one concept of Bruno Latour that I have been quite interested in. He calls it actants. So normally when you think of humans, we call them actors, and then he speaks about objects and things, and he calls them actants in order to give them a proper own category. And he speaks about how agency, normally you think agency is connected to human activity and to humans wanting to create change, and he speaks about how for instance, in a trial, you have an object that was not even at the crime scene, so the thing that shows the gunpowder on your hand, you know, like, I don't know what that's called. Like the machine that it is not the gun, but the thing that proves that this hand shot the gun, something like this. And he speaks about how in the trial, you see that everything starts to turn around this object that actually starts to have power and starts to create a kind of, an agency in the situation that also assembles a social sphere around it. And me, I think this is an amazing idea. I think it's incredible to, especially in theater, where we so often have the human actor as the center of attention, the focus, and then you have all the props and the costumes and the light and the sound, and that's all very often secondary.
Yeah, and also that reminds me of how I thought it's interesting that you create this amazing illusion and this space that you kind of very much get lost in, but at the same time you are actually visible for quite a lot of the time as a person operating this thing, and so you don't exclude yourself. Like, I thought that was also interesting. It's like both the total illusion, but also you're there.
Yeah. No, I try to, not only the fact of me being present, but what we try to do in this piece, because it was made together with a Finnish lighting designer called Minna Tiikkainen, and a French sound designer who's called Gerald Kurdian. And what we tried to do is to say that all the elements should be visible, so there is illusion, but you also see. So you see the machines, you see where it comes from. So there's no mystery about how the thing is created, but it's all the time about the how it's being created and the effect that it creates at the same time.
Yeah, no, that very much came through, I think, also. To speak more about how the effects are being created, I just wanted to ask you, like, how do you make these mountains out of foam? I just want to know.
Hand made love. No, this project was made in a moment where we were not planning to tour it. It was more like I was invited to make a sketch, whatever that means, but that was an idea of taking the idea of a sketch from visual art and thinking what it is in performance. And I was invited to do something like that in a place in Vienna called Tanzquartier. And we decided, so I am very much against this, like, works in progress and showings and all this. So I thought, okay, we make something which should be a finished thing in itself, and then we see. Yeah. And we I
think I can identify with that here.
Yeah.
We always call this place a sketch for some institution that may come into existence or maybe not.
Yeah. But so basically it was a lot like it's working with materials, it's basically foam. And
the tolerance seems so fine, like it's melting, but it's not changing shape. Like it must have been very precise work.
Yeah, no, that's what we have regretted every time we repeat it ever since, because there's no way to do it by machine. There's no way, like, the quality of this foam can only be done by hand. We've tried with hand mixers, with other mixers, with machines. We've tried everything, but we make it by hand.
Yeah, and it seems like also the way, for me at least, the way that you use this pump, somehow it's like very human, that you're creating these waves and feedback effects or something. It's like, I was thinking, like, wouldn't it be easier for Mette just to sit down and a machine to do it? But like, maybe that actually couldn't happen that way.
The thing is that the machines that exist today, so this is a very old dry ice machine that was made for some student showing in Vienna many years ago, and we got it for free because we needed a cheap machine. And then we realized that afterwards we tried actually these professional things, but what they do is that they send out one steady flow, and basically you can't control anything. So you can make it faster or slower, but you can't make waves, and you can't make movement. So then I decided that it's much better when it's handmade, like when it's actually.
No, it's amazing. I love this link that you make between, like, because your work, if you just look at it, the presence of the hand is so interesting because it seems like the ultimate going away from the human body, but it's really not. So, and also I wanted to ask a question about turbulence. Like, it seems to be a lot of turbulence, and I wonder how you, like, first, how do you produce all this turbulence and the smoke and the bubbles, and then why? Is that something that you're interested in, the phenomenon of turbulence?
Yeah, I'm very interested in actually, I made another work where this notion of turbulence or catastrophe is much stronger than in this work. But a lot of people, and I don't know, but when I've heard a lot that people have the feeling of a flood wave, the kind of a. It's also, we performed it right after the Reykjavik, Iceland eruptions were happening, and that the smoke, and so a lot of people had these kind of images coming due to what is happening. So every time there is a catastrophic situation that takes place, then people immediately connect this to the thing. So it depends a bit on the general climate, what is happening.
And so another double, somehow everything, your work produces all these double meanings, like climate now I'm thinking in two ways. But I also wanted to ask you about the score. How did you develop the score, and could you say a little bit about the score?
It's based on an idea of proximity and perspective. So what we try to do is that at first, so it was made in connection to this piece called Giant City. So there was the idea about how to make bodies feel as if they're giants. And this we thought by actually the fact of being with the feet into the thing and having this kind of bird view. There's the idea of thinking that you could be a huge body looking down at this miniature landscape. And then, so it's built like this, that you first have this bird view, then you have a frontal view, and then afterwards we have frog's perspective, no? So that you're actually underneath the sky. And for me that had to do with proportion, no? So how actually as a spectator you might experience space in very different ways in different moments of the piece. So.
And this relates to the score in the sense that you feel closer or farther. It's because are they natural sounds from nature? Sometimes they just seem like that to me, at least.
The sounds. I mean, because there's the score of the material, then there's the score of the light, and there's the score of the
all temporal elements in your work.
So all of the scores are. Kind of working together, of course, but and sometimes we go for more realistic representation, so wind or drops, and other times it has a more abstract quality, and it's the same in all of the elements, that sometimes you can really say this looks like, and other times I don't know at least what it looks like.
Yeah, like it seems to have a very, you could say, like a complicated relationship to representation. Sometimes it's representation, like you say, and then other times it's science fictional or something like that. Yeah. I know that also I had come to see your work, Artificial Nature Project in Essen, and so I know that this is a part of a series, and I wonder if maybe you could say a little bit about the series that you've embarked on with this piece.
I mean, I made 4 projects that are all related to the idea of artificial nature, and the 3 others are. There is one that's actually in a forest. It's a walk for people who walk through a light. It's called the Light Forest, and I did an installation of light. And all of the works have a lot to do with changing the position of the body, so removing the body from the stage, or trying to put the body in a secondary relationship to the materials on stage. And in that, I'm quite interested in what happens to the bodies that are looking at, because I think it's still very much about, for me, everything is based on perceptive experiments.
Yeah.
So it's a lot about how we look, how we perceive color, temperature, density, texture. So it's actually very physical. It's based on very physical principles. Or when you have to walk through a forest and it takes 45 minutes and everyone is sweating at the end, then that's a very physical experience as well.
And is that related to the fact that there's these two tribunes? And so to me, I was also aware that I'm seeing this illusion, but I'm also seeing the other people seeing the illusion.
Yeah. Yeah, it's related to that. No, it's also, I think for me coming to the theater is always a social thing. It's quite, that's something in relation to museums, for instance, that is quite different. Like the fact that it's a certain hour, you have to come there, you're a group, you sit down together and you leave together. Afterwards you might not talk together, but there is a kind of, the collectivity in this moment of being together in the theater for me is something very strong. And I like the absurdity of being a group of people looking at this thing that is, moving or not for. Yeah, so to ask the attention and to give the attention to this thing, material thing that is, and how this produces a social also. So almost like there you sit around the campfire kind of thing.
Yeah.
Certain moment.
Or literally at that moment when the bubbles start, I think. But also for me, it was very interesting how, like, you mentioned this concept of actants, or like objects that have an agency, and that really struck me when the bubbles were there. And I think that the light was white, but because the bubbles were making a prismatic effect, there was color. Like it was like the bubbles were making the color instead of the light or something.
Yeah.
And maybe you could just say a little bit also about how you see this developing. Will you continue to do works that are related to this, and in what way will your future, is what you're working on now related to this?
It's not. No,
that series is over.
I worked 5 years on this stuff, and right now I'm doing something else, and I still don't know what it is, so it's gonna have to wait.
And do you have, I'm aware that you also have, in addition to your choreographic practice, a research project. And could you just say a little bit about that and how that informs, like what is it that you research, and how did it come about that you decided to start a formal research project?
Yeah, so I'm doing one of these practice-based PhDs in choreography. And I'm researching the relationship between artist writing and artist practice, but I'm using my own practice. So basically I work on the relationship between choreographic writing, so non-verbal writing, and verbal writing. It's a little bit more complicated. And I work a lot on discursive practices, so how movement is produced through language, how fiction in language can be produced, can be used to produce choreography. And that I have, so these projects are part of that, but I do a kind of counter part, which is where I'm talking about it and moving and doing things at the same time.
So you talk about the work while also executing choreography.
Yeah.
Amazing. And is there a time when that will happen soon, where it's possible to see it?
Yes, in Bergen in September.
Okay.
You're welcome.
Do we have? Would you? I'm not trying to make you into advertising yourself, but I just want to know. I'm asking you the questions I want to know. So would you mind if we took a couple of questions from the audience?
That's good.
Yeah.
Hi, I just wondered why you've actually chosen yourself to be pumping the foam. You could have got somebody else to do that. I mean, if you'd had the machine, you wouldn't have been in there. I wondered why you yourself, the artist, have chosen to be in there with the audience and with the artwork.
That's because I have a history of being a performer and I can't get myself off the stage. No, no. I think it's a. It could be someone else doing it. I'm very picky with. This work is very difficult to, like, it's very delicate. It sometimes really doesn't work. So I'm anyway there in the spaces to make it work. And so it makes the most sense that I do it, I think.
Other questions?
It was really enjoyable, incredibly seductive. And so I want to ask about your relationship to seduction and to the, a son et lumière tradition, and because I think many of your generation are interested in making anti-spectacles. Yeah. So where do you situate yourself in relation to the seductiveness of color and texture in this work? So that's about my history also. I was in school still when the whole so the people in Europe who were very busy with Iwan Rainer's No Manifesto, in the sense of saying no to spectacle, no to virtuosity, no to seducing and being moving and being moved, and all these things. And one of my first works was based on a manifesto I wrote that is called the Yes Manifesto, and it's not the opposite of the No Manifesto. It's trying to define a positive of, so the things that I'm interested in. I feel that in relation to spectacularity, that there is so much spectacularity going on in our world, and we're constantly confronted with imagery that is very overwhelming. And one way to say I resist is to say no, I don't do it, I do something else. And for me, is a more is to think about how is this spectacularity operating. What is it for? Because very often it's used to sell products, to not have a critical relationship to anything, or you go to the cinema and you have this avatar and it's totally over-sensorial and you get overwhelmed. But I still think that being able to deal with spectacularity is actually a task that we in the arts also need to do. So to just say no is almost too simple. Plus, it's been going on for quite a while, and the moment when it becomes an aesthetics, I think it's also something to rethink, like that criticality doesn't need to look like no light, no sound, no materials, no set design, no, all these no's that were very strong in the 90s.
Other questions? Okay, I'll just ask one more. Is that okay? Yeah. I wonder if, because we were putting together this program here, and we were trying to combine projects from different fields that push against the boundaries of their field. So for me, you're definitely one of the most interesting people who's kind of expanding choreography in a very interesting direction. But I wonder also if there are people from visual art, which is where primarily I worked before, who influence you, because obviously it is very related to the visual art craft modes or something. And I just wondered if there are visual art references that are important to you.
Sure, but it's like the ones that are obvious. Like there's Anne-Veronica Janssen, who is a Belgian artist who also. But I think actually I'm not so influenced by the ones who work with the same materials as what I do. It's not really there. I'm more like, right for the moment I'm looking at all this stuff from the 60s in visual art and performance art, and that's a completely other thing. So, but I think the questioning of the boundaries, so work that does that, has a strong effect on me. And I've been looking a lot at the work of Anad Mick, which is this video work, which I think in the visual art, I don't know, for me it's very strong because of how it is choreographic and his use of kind of formalization and also always working on social and political questions that then get abstracted and materialized through movement. So, but I know when I speak with my visual art friends that this is not a reference that I'm supposed to, you know, speak
It's
loud
not cool
about.
enough.
It's not cool, but I find it really fascinating.
Oh, that's great. Okay, well, thank you so much for taking the time to do this with us afterwards. And of course, I'm very happy that you came all the way to Manchester to do a project here. Thank you, Mette Ingvartsen.